So here at Precision Sourcing, every quarter we run an event called the SAP Knowledge Share Group, and last month was no different. On the 5th of March, we hosted our 11th event. Now before the event, we actually reached out to our SAP community to ask them what topic they would like to learn about at the event. And S4HANA was the buzzword, how to get there, when to do it. So what we did is reached out to a specialist in this space, Acclamation. And Acclamation have just finished 2 S4HANA programs in record time. I think one was 5 months. So what we asked them was to present their 10 insights from those programs. And we have it here on a video. So please click the link below. This is the video from the night. And if you have any other questions, please reach out to sap@precisionsourcing.com.au and we'll be able to follow up. Thanks.
So S4HANA, the challenge, it's significantly different, as you all appreciate from ECC. A different world, a different database, a different paradigm, and new technologies enable a lot of exciting capability. But that means, it can mean significant change for organisations to get there. As I said before, 2027 is the extension of time granted, and maybe even out to 2030. So you might say, well, we've got lots of time to think about it. What's the rush? Analysts are still predicting there's going to be a shortfall of SAP resources across the ANZ market. And I think Simon, when we first met, was probably open to an easy question for him to ask me when we were talking about this perfect storm that existed. He asked me, what's your biggest challenge? I said, finding and retaining the best people, and I realised then that he was an excellent salesman that landed the best question he possibly could at the right time. So well done, Simon. So the other thing that I think is going to impact us is the other major projects in market. So you'd probably all be aware, and I was for 10 years at SAP, there was a business case called JP 2077, which was just Defence Logistics project, which was all about replacing Mincom and upgrading, refreshing supply chain for all of the defence forces as a joint project. IBM have won that, and I think because they can only use local resources, it's going to draw a lot of people into that space. It's going to be interesting to see how they deliver on that, but it's going to impact us as a tier 2 for sure in attracting and retaining the right people to undertake these projects as the wall gets closer for people to get to S4 from ECC, because it's not something you can ignore. You've got to do something about it. So what's interesting, I spent 4 years away from SAP before starting with Acclamation. When I came back, I was really quite surprised I sort of think that SAP did a great job at delivering an excellent solution to market poorly. I can say that now because I don't work for them. There's so many people in the market, or organisations confused in the market. It's such a massive change, and there's a lot of miscommunication or ill advice on how to get to S4. It's probably favoured. I'll say this. I'm biased to say this, that the tier 1s have probably seen this as the next wave of putting 150 consultants on site and selling the chance for refreshing. And that suits some, where there's a business case to do so. That's a valid approach. I'm not knocking it, but it doesn't suit everyone. The business case isn't there for every organisation. Particularly, I've worked in public sector to throw out what you've got and start again. Going to the secretary of a department, say for education or transport or whoever, to say, hey, you know this thing we've been doing with SAP for the last 5 or 8 years, let's do it again. Doesn't wash sometimes. Proof of concepts, not sure, and even this, which is the sidecar. I'm actually not too sure what this is, but there is this notion that you could sort of run side by side an SAP S4 system, which is our rocket ship on the right-hand side, the ECC system on the left-hand side, loosely coupled. Not too sure what that means, but I think all of this has sort of created confusion in the market and made it probably difficult for organisations to see a path forward, because they're stalled through business case or misguided information or just not understanding the opportunities ahead of them. It's really hard for some organisations to prove the case forward, because what they've got is sometimes fit for purpose, right? And again, looking at public sector, there's a lot of IP that's built up over many years that, proposing that you're going to re-implement SAP from scratch is really hard to take, because you've spent so many years developing all this IP. You don't want to throw it away, and there's value in that. Again, the business case to go on a Greenfield's journey of re-implementing doesn't always make sense. Technical upgrade, which is one of the other three opportunities, doesn't give you any change. You end up with the same S4 system you had, with the same org structures, the same sales units, the same controlling areas. All of that stuff stays the same and the same data, and that may not make sense. There's a low risk or appetite for change. Sorry, there's a low appetite for risk and change in many organisations, which makes it hard. And there's a preference, I think, there's a real preference for taking a staged approach. Rather than starting again, to say, okay, well, could we get to S4 with minimal disruption, undertaking the business partner conversion, the Unicode conversion, New GL, all of those things that are mandatory to get to S4 with little disruption, and then decide how we want to transform, how we want to use a Fiori, how we want to simplify the business, etc. And that's making more and more sense to organisations, I think, and resonating with organisations. That sort of, we'll do it at our own time frame and what have you. Now, given the maintenance extension, we've probably seen some organisations rush to market for the project to get to S4, given the limited time. And so we've certainly seen the foot taken off the gas by some who have taken a big deep breath out and said, thank God. But others who are thinking, well, how else could we approach this? And it's not, getting to S4 in a single hop, which is the methodology we use, isn't the only approach, and it's certainly not, the approach that everyone has to take. So there's opportunities for the database conversion, doing a lift and shift to cloud to optimise your spend with infrastructure, custom code remediation so that it works with HANA, and looking at all those interfaces, everything that touches SAP going into and out of. Those are all opportunities for you to get ready for the move to S4 if a single hop project doesn't make sense. And now we've been given the luxury of time to think about those things rather than rush into a project. So I mentioned it at the beginning of the presentations. There's really only three, if you discount moving to Oracle, Workday, or Salesforce, opportunities for you if you're running ECC and want to move to S4. One is the Greenfield approach, which is effectively a restart. Were presented with that as an option. It was going to be expensive, and it was going to take them more than 12 months. And you'll hear Michael talk about some of the drivers as to why they chose the approach that we positioned with them, and some of the reasons why this approach that we took made sense. The business risk is really high. You're really taking big change on across your organisation, and depending on how you use SAP, that may be okay, it may be acceptable, and maybe it's not. Some small organisations, it may be better to leave what you've done behind and re-implement a single tenant edition of SAP and go with open items and new balances and open items, and move ahead with that. The brownfield approach is very much technical. We realise we've got a square peg with our data and a round hole with S4, but we've got a lot of people that we can throw at it and we can transform and convert that data. But that's a very iterative and manual approach. You haven't got the opportunity to change what you've got. You can't optimise your system. You can't change config. You're taking exactly what you have from ECC into S4, and it's also there's a lot of risk around it. Underestimate the amount of defects you'll get with code, because everything's going to break and you're going to have to fix it. So why we've sort of settled on this hybrid approach is the one we want to sort of focus on ourselves, is what it does for accelerating a customer's journey. I mean, you've heard probably in the highlights that 5-month project for us and for them. In that time, we're able to clean up their system, reduce the data, move them to business partner, implement UG, all of those things with a single downtime, and also take them to cloud in a single downtime. So for you can appreciate. Anyway, sorry, I'm stealing Michael's thunder, I'll move on. It collapses the expected path. So often when we talk to organisations, they're thinking, okay, we're on ECC, we're on premise, we'll move to cloud, we'll move to Suite on HANA, we'll do the necessary changes, and then we'll move to S4. But this approach actually turns that on its head, where you can move to S4 as a single project, and those other activities, those dependencies, just become project streams, and Michael will talk about that. It's really predictable and it's a low risk. We go in with a system scan, we know exactly what the system looks like in ECC, we know exactly how it's going to map to S4, We then do a deep dive into the customisations that are going to break, and we can focus on that. So we can come out with a project plan plus minus 5-10% of the costs, and have a high level of certainty, as we did with. We're going to deliver on time and on budget. So it's very different to maybe some of the SAP projects you've been involved with, where the stress is towards go live. And I know I spoke to one gentleman before who loves that stress of the go live cutover period, and all hats off to you. But the stress in these projects is very much towards the beginning, and the end of the project is very anticlimactic, which is rare for SAP projects.
Does the system scan or the readiness assessment on customers and their systems, and this is actually a pretty integral part to the whole of our project setup, because this enables us to do or have a full understanding of the customer's environment, so the modules that they use, the customizations, etc., which enables us then to build an estimation of the timeline, costs, the resourcing we need in order to deliver the project, and that gives us, and as Pete mentioned, about plus 5%. So in terms of change requests, and I'll speak about some of those little things about the two projects that I've delivered for the two conversions. Well, it really does set the scene and the platform for the project.
Engage the customer to say, let's look at your data and see how we actually take that data and convert it to a S4 data set. How do we enable your business processes? How do you get you there with the least effect on your existing environment? So what we typically do is we've got a set of transports, not to go into too much detail, which we supply to the customer. They run it through their system, typically their production system, and what we get from that is a high-level overview. Sorry, I just want to walk this side.
Yep.
High-level overview of their system metrics. So firstly, what is their system consisting of at the moment? Are they on ECC6? What enhancement pack? What DB they use? Have they enabled Unicode? Have they enabled new GL? Have they embedded the CVI process? Because all of those things play a part in how do we determine to get them to their final end state. We also look at their modular usage, and again, if you look at your SAP systems at this stage, you've got a lot of modules implemented, smaller, bigger, and in some of the modules you use small pieces, in other modules you use the full modules, and that plays an integral role again in how do we get you to that S4 state. So that becomes part of the assessment we do, the roadmap that you have to put forward. So the modular usage is very important. Then we look at data volumes. To give you a simple example, the scans that we're currently doing range anything from 22 terabytes to 50 terabytes. We get to a point where we look at the data consumption, where we can say to a client, you've currently got 45 billion records within your system. We then go a step further and we look at their organizational usage. So what we then do is say to them, you've got in your organization, you've got 50% of your organizational structure that's not being utilized. We then do a further calculation utilizing our tools, and we can tell them with certainty we're going to reduce your current environment and not taking HANA database into consideration from 20 terabytes to 10 terabytes, just as a starting point. We're going to reduce your data volume or your footprint from 45 billion records to 25 billion records. And we can actually tell them where that saving would be. So looking at the data volumes. We then look at customizations, and I think Pete and the guys that's been in the business for a long time will tell you that with each client you go to, they will tell you, I'm highly customized, my business is very complex, you're not going to be able to do this. When we start looking at these customizations, and typically you've got transactions and programs which make up the biggest portion of the customizations, when we assess that, we find, and this is across about 20 clients that we've done in the recent time, that only 20% of that data or the customizations are actually utilized. If we add to that maybe the yearly or the irregularly used customizations, we maybe go up to 25%. So already that we move that out of the equation. We also then implement additional scanning tools where we can actually tell them that 80% of those customizations we can remediate relatively easy with standard changes, and then obviously there's a 20% or whatever the case might be that we will say will take a bit more attention. So that helps a lot to get them to that point of making a decision. Similar to that, we look at simplifications. As part of the scan, we will pick up which simplifications they've got in there, or which will be applicable to them, and we start discussing with them how does that impact on their business processes, what workarounds will have to be done to actually get to that. So that already gives them a good idea of what the complexity will be to move to the S4 system. And then the last thing we look at is obviously interfaces. We do an interface scan, looking at what is the existing interfaces that they've got in and out, and how complex those interfaces will be to actually remediate and get it working again. So in a nutshell, that's more or less what we do to get to that point where we can show them that this is your roadmap, and we can actually with certainty go and say, we'll do this for you in 5.5 months, and it's not a time and material project. We'll put our commitment down and say, this is the fixed price that we're looking at to do this for you. So just looking at the scan quickly, a graphical display, the client actually gets access, or the customer gets access to this, where you can show in detail what modules are used, what percentage of your data is SAP standard data, so you can define what is your custom data that's being utilized. We give them a perfect view of their organizational structure with drill down capability, where you can actually go and look at the utilization within those structures. If we start talking to them, and this is where the hybrid solution comes in place, where we say, when we do this move for you to S4, it's not all your data going across. You can realign your chart of accounts, you can realign your organizational structure in the sense of your company codes. If you want to renumber specific objects, we can do that for you as well. And by means of our assessment, then we can say, if you want to change company code, what data objects will be affected, how do we actually improve that specific environment for you. And this is typically where we pick up major reductions in data volumes. We can even consolidate company codes, all of that as part of this one move to S4. So you actually get the benefit of optimizing your S4 data and your structures going forward. Let's go to the next one. And I think the last one that I just want to show, this was one of our smaller scans that we've done, but we can actually go and divide the data into your different structures, where you've got your master and your transactional data, with drill through to the detail. So we can at this stage go down to the detail level to show them what is the data volumes they use, what is the actual volumes within the different environments. So we normally align this back to, you'll see in the scan, you can see HR, so you can see precisely what's the volume of data sitting within HR or within sales distribution. I normally go a lot deeper than this, and I pick up what's your master data around materials, vendors, customers, so what's the impact from a CVI process to actually do that whole process, because those are the difficult things when you go to S4. So this scan forms about a 30-40 page presentation. We do a 10 or 20 document around that with all the options around how do you get to S4 and what is the impact on your data and your processes.
We had a strong start point with respect to any customer, because that vision of what is the end state, and I'll repeat that a little bit later, especially when we talk about lessons learned, that the starting point is one of the most important things, because if you have the same vision between yourself as a project and the customer, that is a straight win. It's straight away a massive and huge win, because it means to say that everybody has the same vision, everybody's going in the same direction, and you don't get deviations. There is no changes with, oh, I want to do this, or I want to do this configuration. We stick to the same schedule. We know what it is before we even start. How do we define the approach? And the scan enables us to actually, with the customer, select the best approach, i.e. between the Greenfield, Brownfield and the hybrid. Because if it's a case where we want to make multiple changes and we want to implement new gels, do a Unicode conversion, all these factors, then that will help us for us to direct the customer and say, this is the best approach that we believe that you should take. So in terms of the diagram that you see here, this is just a simplified version. It doesn't show the iterations that we go through. One of the things I would say is, in the two projects that we've done in association with the ECC to S4 conversions, both customers migrated to the cloud at the same time. That was a massive benefit to us as a project. And the reason why I say that is because the spinning up of systems, provisioning of systems is extremely fast. When it comes to on-premise, it can be extremely slow. There's lead times with respect to hardware, there's provisioning, but in the world of the cloud, It's perfect in relation to what we do, and that assists us in actually to turn around things very, very quickly, and also spin up new systems for different things as well. So one of the things that we needed to tell customers is about the expectation around increase of your subscription related costs for your cloud costs.
So just a question, so they moved to platform as a service with an on-prem instance of HANA?
No.
They went with an MTE?
It's straight into the cloud. So we build the systems, and I'll come to that in a second.
Okay.
So all of the systems that we actually build are all in the cloud. So it could be in Amazon.
Is it
Software.
software?
Is it infrastructure as a service?
It's infrastructure as a service.
Yeah, so that's PaaS. Yeah.
So right, you're referring to PaaS, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
So it's infrastructure as a service. So in terms of where do we start? One of the things that we have to kind of agree on with respect to a customer is what do you want to test? And it really does depend upon the system that you're actually migrating. So what I mean by that is whether it's a finance system, whether it's a HR system, it does payroll. So one of the things that we actually need to discuss right before we even start is what do you want to test? Because if you set the expectations with the project team, so for example, I need to do two payroll runs, right? Just to make sure that when we do actually cut over to production, everybody's fine. So one of the things that we do at the start is say, we'll take a copy of your ECC system. So by taking a copy, I'm not impacting production. I can do whatever the hell I like with that. One of the things we tend to use a sandbox version. So they take a copy of it to sandbox. We then take the sandbox version and we carry out specific tasks. We REST, which is the tool that actually decouples your data from your technical configuration, your system itself. We then take that. Typically we create, what we're trying to do is create a shell, an empty shell. We then do a DMO process on, and the DMO process is what you typically carry out as part of a brownfield approach. But remember, there's no data in this system. So in terms of a brownfield, we don't have to fix any data at this stage. It's not relevant. The only thing we have to worry about is fixing all the configuration to meet the S4 format. So we can actually do the things like the GL, the Unicode, in that one step. So it saves a hell of an amount of time, and there's no outage. I still haven't hit an outage yet. So straight away we get to this empty shell, we do a conversion on it, we've got our S4 empty shell, and now we're into the part where, based on the discussions with the customer, what do they want to do in terms of reorganization of the data, etc., we can then start building the business rules in the tool, in the transformation tool. So what that enables us to do is to just, based on the business rules, we can play around with it, change the numbering schemes, do the customer to vendor conversion, and then we can actually put that information or put that data into our shell system, and we end up with an S4 system. And obviously later down the track, this is an iterative approach which is not really reflected in this diagram, but that iterative approach we go through a number of mock runs, and the mock runs are all about data validation, and I'll mention those a little bit more. But the final one is the production one. So 3 mock runs, and then we're into our go live. And the mock runs are all about data. What does the customer expect? And because we've taken a copy of it, we can use comparisons of the reports to make sure that the data matches what in the old system as to what they expect in their new system. And by doing that, the data validation process typically, and I'll give you an example, that data validation was 3 hours across finance, HR, MM, all those type of things. Was 4 hours. And one of the things that I made kind of was break that down into specific groups, so we cut down on the amount of data validation time. So I have parallel streams working on all these different areas in order to make sure that that we meet that data validation, because that's actually part of my system downtime.
So we're using Payroll ECP or Payroll, what we're using ECC? You mentioned Payroll, were you doing ECP or?
So in terms of Payroll, we did that Payroll test using the S4 system, with the data migrated across from the ECC system. One of the next step actually after we did that was we implemented single touch payroll. That was the next step for that one.
Sorry, can I just clarify so no success factors in this?
No. Definitely not.
If there was a change in the chart of accounts, how did you go about validating the data?
Difficulty.
It takes a bit of practice.
Is it an art or a science?
How do you describe it? So what I would say is Mockeron 1 takes us the longest period of time in order to develop that specific data, that validation process. So I'm not saying it's not complex in nature. It takes time in order to do that. So what we do is we develop the tools. So typically something like Mockeron 1, we're looking at really about a month and a half for the whole process, and data validation would take us typically over a week.
Yeah, if I can maybe add, just coming back to the question. So typically the tool sets we use have got predefined testing capabilities, so we test very much at table structure level. So we do a table count, volumes, all of those type of things, and then where there's specific balances that we want to validate, we build predefined reports or rules in the tool that will actually convert that so we can match the same.
And then using the system standard reports that come out, we also check that as well. So yes, the tool that we actually use provides you with a, if you like, a technical two-step validation process. There's one associated with the domains, that the information has gone into the correct format, and the other one is the amount of tables and information that's successfully transferred from the ECC system to S4. Sorry, I need to move on. Sorry.
Quick question. Do you also get the client to actually reconcile the stuff as well, or is it just your team?
So we do two different types of reconciliation. We do a reconciliation on our front, but really when it comes to the production one, it's everybody that's doing the reconciliation. We do 3 steps when we do mock runs. The first one is the technical or the tool related validation. The second one is we as a project team and a functional team do validation, and then we hand it over to the customer. So the idea is as we gradually move through these and we refine those rules, what we do is we actually get a better outcome in terms of data, and we slowly gradually cleanse it to get to that 100% mock run 3. So when it comes to production, everybody knows exactly what they're doing, and it's quite a slick affair. We had a low internal customer competency. A lot of the IP was actually outsourced to the managed service providers. So really from a project team perspective, it was actually quite difficult to drive through, but I had good sponsorship from the customers on both, and having multiple meetings with lots of different groups to say this is what it is, this is where it needs to be, managed to cut through a lot of that. Actually give me a massive amount of responsibility to do that within their organisation. It was long days, lots of meetings. Internal resource constraints, as rightly mentioned, with respect to they went through 2 reorgs. I think it must be us, actually. Every time we pitch up at a customer, they manage to do a reorganisation of whatever it is. It was a cull across the board. However, it was a financial restructure. So the people that we're actually dealing with in terms of things like data validation, signing off specifics, suddenly got replaced, and people coming in, and then it's a re-education piece. Becomes a bit, it's very difficult. Migration to cloud platform for agility. This is a massive win for us to do it within this period, and I can't stress that enough. So for things like spinning up of systems, etc., this is why we can actually do things really, really quickly. Apart from the fact that the tool does the transformation and the changes with respect to the system, cloud provisioning allows us to build systems very, very quickly and also move data. And we can also practice as well. Because one of the things that we it's highlighted here, for those customers with extremely large databases, what we've also got to do is we've got to practice that migration. Because one of the things we need to cut down on or define is the actual operational change window, i.e. the outage period. And if you don't define that, and you get to that point where, well, actually I need 5 days, they're going to go, sorry, you didn't tell me this before I start. So the earlier you do that in the piece, the better it is when it comes to actually negotiating an outage window with respect to a customer. So, for example, was roughly about, I think it was about 3.5 days. It was done over a weekend, so that was taken down at close of business on Friday, and it was back up and running on Monday at 6 p.m. 6 a.m. Sorry, 6 a.m. So yeah, some of the things that we actually find is that on many of the terabit systems, you've got over 1 billion records just in 2 tables. You know, it's huge amounts of data. So one of the things that as a project team we've got to do is practice that migration technique. One of the beauties of taking this approach is, thank you. I must come here more often. Great bar. Is this low change management? The business change management, because we actually straight away we're giving the customer a system with their data in it almost within a month. They're already embedded in it. They're actually being trained, and they don't even realise it when they do data validation. They're familiarising themselves with the system. It's so easy. It's untrue. We spent very little time in doing change management. Very little time. In fact, I couldn't believe it. The finance team they'd previously tried 2 S4 conversions and failed both times, and the amount of money they spent just purely on the change management piece was astronomical. And when we actually did this project, they couldn't believe the amount of little cost and money that they spent on the business change management part.
Question?
Yes.
Did you use any automated test tools, or were you just using the migration tools?
So again, it depends on the customer. A lot of the tests, in terms of those specific guys, were all mandrolic. They were all manual.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing.
Unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast, and purely because there's a hell of an amount of customization.
It was only finance, it wasn't any of their other warehouse management or IBP or...
I'll just stick to the finance one. I can't say any about their other systems, but we're interested. And we're speaking.
And then question, I'm assuming there's of course no Fury element to this, so they were using...
Right, so one of the things I've got to mention, yes, we do actually implement the Fiori framework within the new environment. Yes, there are some tiles that you have to migrate to when you move from ECC to S4, but it is not a full implementation of Fiori because that requires a different or a whole discussion around security. Yeah, so it's really taking your existing system, warts and all, changing it, upgrading it, cleaning it, getting rid of that legacy stuff that really you don't need, giving it the foundations for the next step. Because really, I'll use as a good example, where the next step that they wanted to do, they wanted to limit that risk. They needed to implement something very quickly, but they want to move on to the next stage. The next stage is actually more of a business transformation piece rather than a technical upgrade. So they really want to refine that and actually further restructure their organisation in order to implement things like Fiori. So yes. So in terms of some project-related details, custom code remediation. So around, just to give you an example, was over 4,000, I think it was 4,861 custom codes, and what we did with respect to those is we do an analysis of those, we prioritise those, high, medium, low. We then indicate whether we're going to fix them, i.e. remediate. Some of those we automatically replace as part of the S4 conversion, and then all the rest get rid of. Mock trial runs. We don't provision for a fourth, however, if it's required, so for example, they make late changes with respect to their organisational structure, etc., that would require another mock run, because really, when it hits mock run 3, we should be at that 100%. We should be at that, we have finished, there are no changes with respect to this. This is what we're going to go live with. So if there are changes after mock run 2, then we would typically need another mock run to make sure. Yes?
So you just mentioned about the reorg, right? Reorg.
Yeah.
How do you manage this reorg? Just be, from ECC to S4, just so happen. Did you use, some SLO, the tools, or you manage this manually?
Yep.
So the tools that we use has got the capability, as we explained before. We decouple the data, so we take it out.
Yeah.
We then, as part of mixed process, what he does is typical old terminology where we set up the migration strategy, which contains all the requirements and the changes that we need to do, and that then goes into our conversion tool or our cockpit, and based on that it then reorgs the data. So if I'm going to change either company code or realign them, it happens all within the tool, and it restructures the data and puts it back into the system.
Yeah, but talking about the migration tools, the migration cockpit doesn't really manage every single.
But we're talking about migration cockpits. I'm just using the word cockpit, so we're talking about SMP transformation backbone.
So it's not the migration cockpit that I believe that you're au fait with. This is specific tools that actually perform that conversion process.
If customer wish to have a reorg plus the whole chart account refinement, just use the SAP best practice. How do you manage it? It's just all done in the tool. The part that needs to be done is the documentation and agree what is that new structure, what is the endpoint, what are we trying to get to. That then allows us to build the business rules to then dictate with respect to taking the data from ECC, restructure it, reorganize it, renumbering, cleanse, transform, harmonize, whatever you want to call it. There's a number of steps that it can actually go through, but at the end it does all the conversion to S4. So it eliminates a lot of those steps. So you don't need an SLA at all?
Sorry?
SLO.
So if you look at the naming convention, if you go and look at SAP tool, that's got the SLT portion in it, so it uses the same.
And I think that's the question. This isn't the standard SAP.
No, it's not the standard SAP tool. It is based on SLO.
Yeah, SLT.
It's SLT. Yeah.
Yeah, they change the name all the time.
So it's based on it, but it's embedded in the tool. So SAP is one of the partners that can actually use and trademark that portion as well.
What can the tool not do? What's the constraints?
That's a damn good question. I haven't really come across anything yet.
Workflow, we remediate the workflows.
Workflow is the.
Yeah, as part of the scan, we identify all your workflows, go through that active, inactive workflows, re-embed the workflows.
Yeah, I mean, it can't do interfaces, but we get a scan from it. I mean, a lot of that can be automated by different tools. So customizations can be remediated by different tools and not the SMP tool. So just to give you an example of the kind of number of tests that we did for was 4,232 test cases that we went through. That doesn't include retests or anything like that. So going back to that system scan, what this enables me to do, and not just myself, but in terms of the project, it allows us to build a structure of how we resource this based on the knowledge of the system and where we need to put more resources. So this gives us, if you like, all the work streams that we've got, and from that system scan allows us to build through these. And each one of these streams need to obviously report and pass their information. The change management piece, this one was relatively small. Most of the change management piece was just associated with documentation. Sorry, I'll move on as quickly as possible. We okay with that? Lessons learned. Here's just some examples of some of the pitfalls that you will have and the lessons that we've learned associated with doing conversions. What I would say is that if you like, the top 5 are not really on this list for me, is make sure you get a clear picture of that end state. Make sure if you have too much innovation, or you want to do too much innovation, that extends your project timeline. So, are you going to do a project in 5 months? No chance. No way. If you want something that's relatively quick, you want to cut down the innovation, yes, you can do specific things, yes, you can reorg, yes, you can renumber, you can do a bit of cleansing, whatever it is. If it's nice and relatively simple, you can do it in those time periods. Yeah? But having that clear end state, an agreement with the customer is essential. One of the things that we actually do is document that. And the other part that we actually can also do is document for the change management piece alone. We have a document that indicates what the difference is when they move from ECC to S4. So change management wise, they know that well in advance. And it's important
that. On the data cleansing piece, did you have them do the data cleansing before your 5.5 months started?
Yes. So one of the things that we've got to say is again, based on timeline, based on what the drivers are, a lot of the cleansing part is actually done by the customer. It has to be done by the customer beforehand, because if it's done within the project, then that means more time. It's an unfortunate thing.
Mick, we just need to clarify that data cleansing is 2 sides of it. So if you do proper cleansing beforehand, that's closing open items, flagging for the leads and those type of things, you can do beforehand. But then we can do as part of the transformation process. If you apply or give us rules, that happens immediately as we convert to that.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Project structure. So going back to that previous slide and the system scan that we did, that enables us to have that clear project structure from an SI. But also when we talk about what the customer has to reflect it on the opposite side, is that they have a clear structure and we define roles and responsibilities, your statements of work orders, whatever they have your RACI, everybody understands exactly what they do.
Just a question. Were you involved in pulling forward the line of business, other systems from an integration perspective, and what were the challenges?
Sorry, can you repeat that question, please?
Were you involved in pulling forward the line of business systems from an integration perspective?
Pulling forward?
Yeah, I mean, some of those like legacy systems.
Oh, so as in, yes, so for example, we did. One of the systems that we integrated to was XI. That needed to be upgraded. So one of the things that we actually assisted with, we didn't actually carry this out, we assisted with was the identification of that, because as part of our interface scan, we know what systems you actually connect to. Yep. We start talking to the business owners, the system owners, etc. Yeah, and again, that's a key, one of the other key aspects of the project.
And part of your test suite, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that helps us to identify what systems that we need to bring along the journey and when do we need to do that, because really that's got to align at specific stages, especially when it comes to things like integration testing and those end-to-end process tests.
And the mapping, if you're changing your chart of accounts, you've got a whole mapping of that, right?
So, obviously having the right resources. I'm not just talking about the project wise, I'm talking about the customer wise. Knowing exactly where they are in terms of their intellectual property, in terms of their knowledge of the system. It's good to understand that, because it makes for things like understanding of how do you get quick decisions. If you get the wrong people in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're going to be treading water a lot. So knowing that, having a good understanding of your customer resources in order to get quick decisions is essential. So that's one of the things that I'm not saying that I'm good at, but I tend to pick up quite quickly. Understanding the S4 changes. So one of the things, or a couple of things we mentioned about things like business partner conversion, credit management, absolute pain in the backside, payroll. Yeah, all of these kind of things. The more complex things we're moving from ECC to S4. So having an understanding of that, and taking the customer through that journey as well. Because once the customer understands that, when it comes to things like data validation and testing, it's a walk in the park. It really is. And then obviously customizations and remediation of those customizations. Sorry, I know it's getting late. going through those processes of identification, what are you going to remediate, what are you going to retire, because the amount of customizations has a direct effect on where my go live is. So if I don't resource that properly and to remediate those programs, then I'm not going to meet that timeline.